Shabbat Shalom. So I want to try something for us to say two words that the Israelites as a community said. Let's try it. We'll do a repeat after me. Na'aseh v'nishma. Okay, beautiful. Let's do it all together. Na'aseh v'nishma. Okay. So think about how that sounded to you, and we'll come back to it. Over and over again, I have heard this trope that October 7th was one of the worst events in Jewish history, and this unspeakable tragedy also unified the Jewish people. And to some extent, I think that's true. Days after October 7th, 2023, many of us found ourselves over there in the sanctuary, our hearts aching in pain, consumed by confusion, or scrolling through the news, tears rolling down our cheeks at the unfathomable loss that our people, our community, had experienced. This was before we even knew about the 251 hostages that had been stolen from us. When we gathered here together, or when we gathered in the sanctuary together, the room was packed. On the following Shabbat, it remained full. We felt the fullness of community. Then this past year, when Cantor Sonnet Asor and I led a short memorial service just a year after that horrific and traumatic day, we were joined by far more people in the congregation and online than we had expected. Across the world, Jews and non-Jews came together to raise funds, continue to support the hostages and their family, to bear witness to their pain, and to express their own, to stand in solidarity, to mourn, to weep, and to hope that, God willing, there would be a different future, a better vision. In many ways, the Jewish community has certainly rallied together and unified under this moment of trauma. But we are not entirely unified. Soon after October 7th, we saw many of our Jewish siblings protesting on college campuses or taking to the streets, shouting words that perhaps crossed our red lines, and that led some to post on social media that maybe they weren't even Jews at all. Last Pesach, many rabbis around the world preached about polarization and division, not only in our country or our community, but around our Seder tables. We experienced moments in which children were unable to speak to their parents, unable to understand their parents, and parents in turn could not listen to their children. We were not quite as unified as some of us remember, as perhaps we thought we were. Today, that splintering of the Jewish people continues as a mixture of joy for the return of the hostages and fear for the road that lies ahead sweeps over our beloved Israel, still governed by the most right-wing nationalist coalition in the country's history. The splintering continues as we endure polarization and an onslaught of divisive policy and fear-mongering in our own country. This peoplehood amongst the Jewish people is not yet ripping at the seams, but it is being tested. And it's very different from the picture that our Torah portion, Yitro, paints for us today. The Israelites are about to experience God in all of God's glory, not in the form of the plagues, not in the parting of the Red Sea, but instead in every single natural element coalescing in one space around Mount Sinai, with thunder, fire, lightning, strong winds, and a booming blast of a shofar so loud that they could see the sound in front of them, not to mention God's own voice. As they gather around Mount Sinai for the moment that our commentators call the most foundational and dramatic moment in our entire Torah, one that forms an eternal bond among all of the people of Israel, past, present, and future, God calls upon Moses to tell the Israelites that if they obey God faithfully, then they will receive the precious covenant. Moses goes to the mass of people, so many different people, that left Egypt. And before he can even finish his sentence, our text reads, Vaya'anu chol ha'am yachdav. And they answered him as one people, all together. Vaya'anu, they answered him, kol, all of them, ha'am, the people, Yachdav, together, saying, all that God has said, we will do. There are plenty of instances in our Torah in which people respond with the same words at the same time, but this is the only time in the entire Tanakh that this phrase, Kol Ha'am Yachdav, the whole people together, all the people together, is used. Netivot Shalom, an early 20th century Hasidic master, writes that it was as if Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, spoke in one voice, so much so that each of the voices of the people were indistinguishable from one another. They were no longer individuals. It was as if a miracle had occurred. A friend and colleague of mine, Rabbi Sammy Cantor, reminded me of a comment that Rashi made, you'll remember, a French medieval commentator, on a line in this parsha that takes place just a few verses before. The line reads, having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai, and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain. It's kind of a strange couple of sentences. Why does it repeat that the people encamped there? Why does it say the word encamped twice? Rashi picks up on this immediately, obviously. He says the first time we see the verb, it's in the plural. This huge mass of people, families, children, grandparents, each of them encamped in the wilderness of Sinai. But the second time, the word encamped is in the singular. They were one Am Yisrael, unified, and they encamped as one people. Rashi notes that this change in grammar is actually a comment on how they treated each other while they were journeying. As they left Rephidim, he writes that they quarreled, they gossiped, and they engaged in machlokot, the plural of machloket, arguments, not just any kind of argument, but existential arguments in which one is not able to see the human being before them. Rather, they're only able to hear the opinion abhorrent to them. By the time that they arrived at Mount Sinai, they had undergone some kind of shift. They stopped quarreling and gossiping and engaging in machlokot, and they began to see each other for what they truly were, different people in the same nation. Rashi writes that at this time, they were ke'ish echad belev echad, right? Remember that word, lev, heart? They were like one person with one heart. Though they held different opinions, they came together in community, unified as one person and one heart. We see this amazing example for how we ought to behave in this single comment. We would have expected that, given the grandeur, the incredible awe and trembling of being at Mount Sinai, fire, wind, thunder, lightning, God's self speaking from a thick cloud above the mountain, we would think that that would be the moment in which something changed in the Israelites. That would be the moment of unification. But instead, it's not the traumatic or dramatic that bring the Israelites to view themselves as one community and one nation. They become one in the thickness of the wilderness, trudging through the desert from one place to another, just trying to stay alive. Perhaps that's where we are now. They were able to see themselves not as separate tents, but as one encampment in the wilderness. It was only after that this miracle of Kol Ha'am Yachdav, all the people said together, that we could actually have that miracle. However, this Kol Ha'am Yachdav is actually only the first of 3 times that the Israelites expressed their readiness to enter the covenant with God. I'd like to compare it to the 3rd time they acquiesce, which actually occurs in next week's Parsha. I hope you'll allow. This 3rd instance yields some of the most famous words in our entire Torah, and perhaps some of the best rabbinic thought from our classical commentators. The words you all said in the beginning of this Devar Torah, Na'aseh v'nishma, which means we will do and we will hear, right? The word nishma comes from the word shema. So perhaps it's not just hear, but it's understand or listen or obey, depending on your translation. There is so much commentary on these 2 simple words. But my favorite comes from Rabbi Moshe David Umberto Cazuto. He's got a lot of names, lots of honor there. He writes that this phrase really means we will do, we will act as one, but we will come with our own unique understanding, reasons for being here, and acting this way, our own unique background, each with our singular voice. Just like when you said these 2 words, Na'aseh v'nishma, at the beginning of the Devar Torah, you could recognize different voices. You might have heard Alan's voice from the back over here. You might have heard Cynthia's voice from the front over here, Jeff and Gail right here. You heard each person's individual voice, each person's unique take. You could hear their individuality. Unlike the miracle of Kol Ha'am Yachdav, the Israelites did not respond as a monolith when they said Na'aseh v'nishma. They did not cease to be individuals completely conforming to one voice. Na'aseh v'nishma was said without any help from God. It was all them. Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will understand. We are not one person, yet we act with one heart. This President's Day weekend, as I read these words, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will understand, I'm reminded of another we, a we that we hold sacred, not just as Jews, but as Americans, we the people. And I imagine as at least 9 of those founding fathers stood around, and you can see the picture in your minds, right, of the signing of the Constitution, of the ratification, each of them coming from different backgrounds, each of them having different family stories, each of them certainly with a different voice of what they wanted for the future of this country, and yet all of them saying yay at one time. This President's Day weekend, I invite you to reflect on who we want to be as Jews and as Americans. Are we interested in being Kol Ha'am Yachdav, though it's beautiful to be in one singular voice? Or are we interested in going on a journey and being able to arrive at Na'aseh v'nishma? We will act as one, but we acknowledge our individuality, our unique piece of divinity inside of us. Shabbat Shalom.